Awaken your spirit chosen ones. The most expensive lesson in life is underestimating the one person who never needed to announce who they were. Most people think karma is dramatic, thunder, chaos, instant payback. But real karma is quieter, slower, and far more humiliating. It waits, it watches, and it has an excellent memory. Especially when the person involved thought you were small, harmless, or easily replaced. Here's a fact people don't like hearing. Studies in social psychology show that the individuals who are consistently underestimated tend to outperform their peers long-term. Not because they're luckier, but because they're less distracted by ego, applause, or trying to prove a point. While others are busy running commentary, they're building outcomes. That's not mysticism, that's human behavior. And this is where things get uncomfortable. You were never loud enough to threaten them openly. You didn't posture. You didn't campaign for respect. You didn't even fight back the way they expected. So they assumed you were weak, or worse, irrelevant. They felt safe enough to poke, test, undermine, gossip, manipulate, and cross lines they wouldn't dare cross with someone more obvious. That false sense of safety was their first mistake. Because while they were busy handling you, you were learning, watching, adjusting, detaching. Not in a dramatic revenge movie way, but in a quiet, practical, almost boring way. The kind that doesn't look impressive until it's irreversible. The kind that leaves people saying, "Wait, when did this happen?" right before they realize they can't undo it. And here's the funny part. The part karma seems to enjoy the most. The moment you stepped back, stopped explaining yourself and moved on with your life, they didn't feel relief. They felt unsettled. Because nothing is more suspicious to someone who plays games than a person who suddenly stops playing. It's like realizing the opponent left the board while you were still celebrating a move. This isn't about revenge. It's about consequences. It's about what happens when someone mistakes access for ownership, patience for permission, and silence for ignorance. Everybody involved thought they were in control until life started collecting receipts. And by the time clarity arrived, the only thought left was a quiet, uncomfortable one. We really should have just left them alone. Number one, they didn't lose you. They lost access to themselves. When you walked away, they thought the loss was you. Your presence, your effort, your loyalty, your support. What they didn't realize is that you were more than a person in their life. You were a reference point. You quietly reflected back who they were becoming, even when they didn't want to look. Around you, they had standards to meet, behavior to explain, and choices they couldn't hide behind jokes or excuses. Being near you required honesty, not the dramatic confessional kind, the everyday honesty of showing up right, speaking clearly, and living with consistency, and that made them uncomfortable. So instead of rising, they resisted, they criticized, they minimized you, they tried to make you seem like the problem because facing themselves felt heavier. Once you were gone, something strange happened. The tension didn't disappear, the noise did. Without you there, they no longer had anyone challenging their shortcuts or questioning their habits. At first, that felt like freedom. No one holding the mirror, no one expecting growth, no one quietly noticing patterns. But freedom without accountability doesn't lead to peace, it leads to drift. Over time, their lives didn't explode. They slowly flattened. Conversations got shallow. Goals lost urgency. Decisions became repetitive. They kept moving, but nothing actually progressed, and they couldn't figure out why. They blamed timing. They blamed stress. They blamed other people. What they never named was the absence of the one presence that made them feel seen, even when they pretended not to care. You, on the other hand, regained access to yourself. Without managing their emotions or carrying their blind spots, your energy returned. your thinking sharpened. Your life became quieter but clearer. You didn't need validation because you weren't negotiating your worth anymore. That's the real loss they experienced. Not you walking away, but the part of themselves that only showed up when you were around. The disciplined version, the honest version, the one with potential. When you left, that version went with you. And no amount of regret can bring it back once someone chooses comfort over growth. Number 2, what they did to you became the blueprint of their future. People like to believe their behavior is situational, that what they did to you was a one-time thing, a reaction, a mistake under pressure. But actions don't disappear once the moment passes. They repeat. Not because life is cruel, but because habits don't retire on their own. The way someone treats you when they think they can get away with it becomes the way they approach everything else. They learned something while dealing with you. They learned that cutting corners felt easier than being honest, that manipulation saved time, that avoiding responsibility delayed consequences. And because those tactics worked in the short term, they kept them. They carried them into friendships, work, relationships, and decisions that actually mattered. At first, nothing seemed wrong. People like that often get early wins. They talk smooth, shift blame well, and know how to exit situations before accountability arrives. But life isn't impressed by cleverness for long. Patterns always outgrow the rooms they're in. Eventually, those same moves stopped working. The half-truths caused confusion. The shortcuts created weak foundations. The lack of integrity attracted people who operated the same way. Suddenly, they were surrounded by versions of themselves, untrustworthy, inconsistent, always watching their own backs, and they didn't like the environment they helped create. What makes this kind of karma sting is how ordinary it looks. No dramatic downfall, just stalled progress, broken trust, and doors that almost open but never fully do. Opportunities pass quietly. People hesitate. Energy feels heavy, and they can't understand why things keep slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, you didn't need revenge. You didn't need to explain your side. You simply didn't build your life on tactics that rot over time. You chose clarity over control, growth over winning moments, and that difference compounds. The future they're living in now isn't punishment, it's familiarity. It's the natural extension of the choices they made when they thought it only affected you. Every manipulation trained them for a life where nothing solid lasts, and every honest step you took trained you for a life that keeps expanding. That's the quiet math of karma. What you practice becomes where you live. Number 3. Your absence created the collapse. They blamed on bad luck. They walked around thinking the world owed them stability, as if life would magically rearrange itself to suit their comfort. They assumed that removing you from the equation meant the problems they caused would vanish too. What they didn't see is that you were never the source of their chaos. You were the stabilizing factor. Your presence kept things aligned, conversations smoother, decisions sharper, and even their own impulses in check, whether they realized it or not. When you stepped away, the structures they relied on quietly crumbled. At first it looked like random misfortune. Bills slipped through the cracks, projects stalled, relationships strained. They called it bad timing, unlucky breaks, or just life being difficult. They didn't understand that life has a way of balancing itself, and when a stabilizing element disappears, the imbalance they once ignored becomes unavoidable. Their world didn't fall apart because of fate. It collapsed because the scaffolding that kept their recklessness contained, that scaffolding was you, was gone. What makes this even sharper is that they didn't notice the quiet work you'd done behind the scenes. You weren't there to manipulate or control. You were simply present, reliable, and consistent. That consistency became invisible, but it was powerful. When it vanished, everything that relied on it didn't know how to adjust. The chaos they pretended didn't exist suddenly demanded attention, and they had no tools to handle it. And here's the ironic part. This collapse wasn't punishment. It was natural consequence. Life doesn't have favorites, but it responds accurately. You weren't the villain in their story. Their habits, shortcuts, and negligence were. You leaving didn't create problems. It simply removed the buffer they had been unconsciously leaning on. The world's quiet way of correcting imbalance has a sense of poetic justice. And while they scrambled to figure out why things were falling apart, you were already thriving, free from the weight of their instability. Their bad luck wasn't mysterious. It was the echo of the structure they lost when you were no longer there. Number 4. They confused your patience for permission. One of the most dangerous mistakes someone can make around a chosen one is thinking patience equals weakness. You tolerated their nonsense, overlooked their small betrayals, and kept your composure when they tried to provoke or control you. They interpreted that calm as an open invitation, a green light to push boundaries, test limits, and act as though your life existed to serve their ego. They didn't realize patience is not permission. Patience is strategy, it's restraint, it's observation in its most powerful form. While they were busy testing how far they could go, you weren't passive, you were calculating. Every slight, every manipulation, every backhanded word was recorded, not in anger, but in awareness. You saw patterns, weaknesses, and most importantly, their own reflection. They, however, were blind. They were trapped in the illusion that the person in front of them was a soft target, someone who would bend, apologize, or justify their behavior. The irony is brutal. The more they pushed, the stronger you became internally, even if externally you appeared unmoved. Eventually, reality catches up. Life has a way of showing that patience is not permission and tolerance is not surrender. Every reckless act they committed in the assumption that you'd stay put begins to compound. People notice inconsistencies, trust erodes, and situations that once seemed manageable start spiraling out of their control. Karma isn't loud. It's quiet, precise, and proportional. The very patience they mistook for weakness becomes the measure by which their own recklessness is exposed. Meanwhile, you move forward without drama, without needing to react. The energy they tried to exploit is no longer available. Your calm was never a shield for them to bypass consequences. It was a tool that ensured when you did act, it would matter. They learned the hard way that underestimating restraint is fatal. Patience is not the absence of power. It's the guarantee that when the time comes, power is delivered with clarity and precision. In the end, they confused patience with permission, and the cost of that mistake becomes the quiet, inescapable architecture of their own downfall. Number 5, they spoke against you and accidentally rewrote their reputation. When people speak against someone who refuses to play their games, they think they are controlling the story. They spread whispers, exaggerate mistakes, and twist truths in a way that, at first, feels like power. They believe they're shaping perceptions, winning allies, and keeping their influence intact. But there's a subtle truth they never see. The act of speaking against you says far more about them than it ever could about you. Every lie, every distortion, every rumor becomes a mirror of character. While they're busy trying to tarnish your name, the world is quietly noticing patterns. The consistency of their attacks, the ease with which they vilify, and the energy spent orchestrating narratives all leave traces. People pick up on tone, on obsession, on disproportionate focus. It doesn't matter that they're loud. What matters is that the signal of their insecurity, envy, or duplicity is impossible to hide. Over time, these whispers intended to damage you become the proof of who they are. They thought reputation was a tool they could wield, but reputation is more like clay. It shapes itself around every action you take. Their repeated attempts to undermine you unknowingly crafted an image of someone petty, controlling, and unreliable. They became more recognizable to others as a person who spreads conflict rather than someone who creates value. In trying to pull you down, they effectively elevated you. Not in their narrative, but in the perception of anyone watching closely. Meanwhile, you didn't need to defend yourself. You continued your work, maintained your integrity, and let their words reveal them. Silence became your ally. Every public attempt to smear you became a private lesson for observers. Character is not declared, it's demonstrated, and those who try to shortcut truth expose themselves in the process. By the time reality settles, they are left with a reputation that doesn't match the image they tried to project. And the ironic part, the part life seems to enjoy, is that while they were trying to write your story, they accidentally wrote their own. The very energy spent attacking you becomes the marker of their own limitations, insecurities, and eventual isolation. Number 6, they wanted your energy without paying the price of growth. Some people are drawn to you not because of who you are, but because of the energy you carry. Your focus, your calm, your ability to keep moving when the world seems chaotic. They wanted to soak it up, to borrow strength, clarity, or influence, without ever putting in the work to earn it themselves. They thought energy could be transferred without effort, that your patience, discipline, and resilience were commodities they could claim simply by proximity. What they failed to realize is that growth isn't a resource you can steal. It's a process, a grind, a series of choices made in silence and solitude, long before anyone else notices. While they tried to manipulate, distract, or drain you, you were actively investing in yourself. Every setback became a lesson, every insult a reminder of your boundaries, every challenge a catalyst for evolution. They saw the surface, your composure, your achievements, your apparent ease, and assumed it was effortless. That assumption is the cruel joke of life. The easier it looks, the more work went unseen. And the more they tried to take from you, the further they fell behind. Energy stolen without responsibility doesn't multiply. It stagnates, and eventually it collapses under its own weight. Their attempts to borrow from you created friction, anxiety, and tension in their lives because they were trying to shortcut a process that demands consistency, courage, and accountability. Meanwhile, you kept building. The very qualities they tried to exploit, focus, patience, resilience, became the foundation of your forward momentum, untouchable and unshakable. The irony is sharp. They wanted the reward without the struggle, the light without facing darkness, the clarity without the effort. And while they wasted time trying to extract from you what could only be earned, you were quietly compounding your growth, silently unstoppable. The life they imagined they could influence simply passed them by, leaving them frustrated and stuck, while your energy, authentic, cultivated, and unapologetically yours, became proof that true power cannot be borrowed, stolen, or faked. In the end, they learned too late that you can't take the shortcut through someone else's evolution, and that trying to do so only ensures they watch the results unfold from the outside. Number 7. They tried to break you, but only exposed their ceiling. People who try to break a chosen one rarely realize they are the ones being measured, not the target. Every insult, every manipulation, every push against your boundaries was meant to prove their power over you. They believed that by testing you, bending you, or cornering you, they could elevate themselves above your presence. What they didn't see is that while they were busy swinging at your resilience, they were quietly hitting the limits of their own capacity, the ceiling of who they really are. You didn't crumble, and that wasn't luck. You maintained control over your energy, your choices, and your reactions. Your consistency became a mirror they couldn't face. Every attempt to provoke, pressure, or destabilize you illuminated their own weaknesses: impatience, insecurity, and the inability to manage discomfort without externalizing it. The harder they pushed, the more obvious it became that their strength was superficial. They had stamina for conflict, but no depth for growth, no structure for discipline, no internal compass to guide them when things got complicated. Meanwhile, you were moving forward silently, absorbing lessons from every attempt they made to tear you down. The experiences didn't weaken you, they sharpened you. Every manipulation they attempted became a reference point for your discernment. Every scheme exposed patterns that you learned to anticipate and navigate. While they were trying to prove something to themselves through domination, they were inadvertently teaching you how to rise above them. The irony is relentless. They saw themselves as predators and you as prey, but reality inverted the roles. You became untouchable in your calm, composed, and unshakable growth. They, on the other hand, ran into a wall of their own limitations, trapped by the ceiling they built around their character. Life doesn't need to intervene. Their own choices became the barrier that stopped them from rising any higher. By the time clarity arrives, they realize the truth. Breaking you was never an option, and in trying, they only measured how far they could truly go, and it wasn't far. Your strength wasn't the obstacle. Their ceiling was. Number 8. Their obsession with your fall replaced their own purpose. When people fixate on bringing someone else down, they don't realize what they're losing in the process. Their energy, attention, and ambition become entirely consumed by your life instead of their own. Every thought, every plan, every moment they spent plotting your failure was time they could have used to improve themselves, build something meaningful, or cultivate their own resilience. Obsession disguised as action is the cruelest trap. It feels like control, but in reality, it is surrender to emptiness. They were so focused on your mistakes, your decisions, your success, and your calm that they lost sight of their own trajectory. The energy they tried to pour into controlling you leaked into frustration, anxiety, and constant distraction. They didn't see it, but their fixation created a shadow life, one defined by reaction rather than creation. They were busy trying to script your story, but life doesn't run on scripts. Every attempt to influence you externally only highlighted their own internal lack of direction. Meanwhile, you continued moving forward without fanfare. You weren't preoccupied with their opinions, their judgments, or their schemes. Your purpose, your focus, and your vision were intact, independent of their interference. This contrast is what makes the invisible power shift so striking. You were free because you built your path, while they were trapped because they abandoned theirs to obsess over yours. The irony is devastatingly precise. They thought control over your life equaled advancement in their own, but in reality, it left them stagnant. Opportunities slipped by unnoticed, relationships grew hollow, and ambitions slowed because the mind is a finite resource, and they had spent it entirely on a life that wasn't theirs. By the time they finally notice the emptiness, the realization comes too late. Your life has moved forward, expanding and thriving, while theirs remains in a state of arrested development, all because their obsession replaced initiative. They tried to take your fall as proof of power, but instead they became a cautionary example of what happens when attention is invested in others rather than yourself. Their loss wasn't visible at first, but it was inevitable. Number 9. They mistook your forgiveness for forgetting. Some people carry a false sense of security after seeing you forgive. They think that because you chose to let go of anger, resentment, or the urge to retaliate, You've erased the memory of their actions. They assume forgiveness is weakness, or that it gives them a free pass to repeat mistakes. But forgiveness is not amnesia. It's clarity. It's releasing the weight they tried to place on you while keeping the lesson burned into your awareness. And that lesson becomes your shield, quietly reshaping the way you move forward. While they continued their patterns, they failed to notice the subtle, unstoppable consequence of your forgiveness. You didn't hold grudges, but you didn't return to being naive or unguarded either. Every misstep they tried to repeat against you became part of your discernment. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment of manipulation was catalogued, not for revenge, but as a reference point for future decisions. You weren't just walking away, you were recalibrating. The dangerous illusion for them is that their mistakes were forgotten. In reality, they became embedded in the foundation of your boundaries, your wisdom, and your understanding of human behavior. Every attempt to test you again was met with a subtle but undeniable force, the invisible line of experience they could not erase. Forgiveness gave them no relief. It only highlighted the gap between what they thought they controlled and what you truly understood. Meanwhile, they suffered the quiet frustration of trying to engage with someone who had moved on mentally and emotionally without ever realizing that the past was still present, just in a form they could no longer influence. They expected you to reset, to return to the old version of yourself, but that version no longer existed. Your forgiveness was the quiet engine of your evolution, and their failure to grasp that made every new attempt at manipulation futile. In the end, they learned the truth too late. Forgiveness is not weakness, and forgetting is not required for strength. You move forward lighter, sharper, and wiser, while they remain tethered to the echoes of the actions they hoped you'd never remember. The lesson is clear, but the irony is sharper. They were undone by what they never thought you retained. Number 10. They won small battles and lost the long game. Some people live for the moment, chasing quick wins and temporary victories, believing that a clever maneuver or a well-timed insult equates to control or superiority. When it came to you, they celebrated small wins, a harsh word that made you flinch, a manipulation that drew a reaction, a rumor that spread faster than your response. At first, it felt like they were winning because the effects were visible, immediate, and satisfying. But small victories never define the bigger picture. They are temporary blips in a timeline that rewards consistency, vision, and resilience. While they were counting wins, you were building momentum in silence. Every slight they delivered, every attempt to provoke, was like fuel for your strategy. They saw the reaction, but they couldn't see the underlying accumulation. You weren't distracted by ego, pride, or revenge. You were focused on long-term growth, on habits and choices that compound quietly, like interest in a hidden account. The contrast between their short-term satisfaction and your long-term preparation was invisible to them, but it was fatal in its quiet inevitability. The tragedy of their approach is that they mistook activity for progress. Noise became proof of movement, and reaction became proof of power. But without discipline, without awareness, without vision, activity is just motion. It goes nowhere. You moved forward steadily, expanding, evolving, and strengthening, while their small victories became irrelevant footnotes. They were stuck in the thrill of momentary advantage, blind to the broader consequences of their own choices. By the time reality caught up, the long game had already been decided. Their brief moments of satisfaction couldn't compensate for patterns of short-sightedness. Doors they thought were open closed quietly. Trust they assumed was intact eroded gradually. Opportunities that required patience and foresight slipped by unnoticed. You, on the other hand, were living proof that the long game is won not by noise, but by persistence, clarity, and unshakable self-direction. In the end, they learned too late that life doesn't measure power in flashes or moments. It measures endurance, integrity, and the ability to rise above the chaos they tried to create. Their small wins became nothing compared to the unstoppable trajectory you built while they were busy celebrating empty victories. Number 11. They tried to control the narrative and lost control of reality. Some people believe that if they speak loud enough, lie convincingly enough, or repeat their version of events often enough, they can shape reality itself. They thought that by controlling what others believed about you, they could rewrite your story, diminish your influence, or even make the world see you as the problem. But reality isn't dictated by volume or repetition. It's shaped by truth, consistency, and the weight of evidence, all of which they failed to respect. While they were busy orchestrating stories about you, they ignored the one narrative they could not manipulate: their own life. Every lie, every exaggeration, every rumor revealed patterns that people unconsciously noticed. In trying to bend perception, they exposed their own insecurity, obsession, and lack of self-discipline. The more they attempted to spin events, the more obvious it became that their reality was fragile, dependent on deception, and ultimately unsustainable. Meanwhile, you didn't argue, justify, or defend yourself. You let your life speak in quiet, undeniable ways. Achievements, composure, and growth carried more authority than words ever could. While they were consumed with shaping what others thought about you, your consistency became the real story. People began noticing the contrast between your calm, focused reality and their frantic attempts to control perception. That contrast undermined their narrative in a way no argument could. The most ironic part is that their obsession with control became their undoing. In trying to dictate the world's view, they lost control of their own decisions, emotions, and direction. Their energy, once intended to dominate, became scattered and ineffective. Opportunities slipped by, relationships strained, and credibility quietly eroded. All because they mistook noise for influence and manipulation for mastery. By the time reality reasserted itself, the truth was obvious. Narratives can be spun, but lived truth cannot be erased. They tried to control the story, but they ended up losing control of life itself. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, karma unfolded. Not as revenge, but as the natural correction of someone who misjudged power, focus, and the unshakable force of authenticity. Number 12. They replaced you with people who matched their integrity. After pushing you away, manipulating situations, or trying to bend you to their comfort, they thought life would reward them with easy replacements. They looked for people who would tolerate shortcuts, excuse inconsistency, and overlook character flaws. They wanted companions who matched the same lack of integrity they carried. At first, it felt like relief, a convenient substitute for someone who demanded more effort, more honesty, more accountability. But what they didn't anticipate was the hollowness that comes with surrounding yourself with mirrors of your own weakness. Replacing you wasn't a solution. It was a downgrade. People who fit their level of integrity might nod along, agree with their narratives, or overlook missteps, but they don't challenge, inspire, or elevate. They mirror, they enable, and they stagnate. The more they surrounded themselves with convenience, the clearer the contrast became. Their life became quieter, yes, but not richer, safer, but not stronger. The energy they tried to control with ease couldn't replicate the depth, clarity, and drive you brought naturally. Meanwhile, you weren't trying to fill a void. You were moving forward, building connections with people who aligned with your standards, vision, and values. Your growth was measured, deliberate, and uncompromising. The space they tried to occupy by replacing you couldn't hold the weight of authenticity. Eventually, even their replacements highlighted the absence of what they had lost. The ease of company could never replace the challenge of presence, the kind that forces growth, reflection, and accountability. Irony has a way of arriving quietly. They wanted comfort over character, familiarity over substance, and control over challenge. And in choosing all of that, they discovered something unavoidable. Life with people who match your integrity is never the same as life with you. They lost depth, clarity, and the subtle but undeniable push that comes from being around someone unshakable. In the end, they realized that the people they chose to fill your space weren't replacements at all. They were placeholders, and no amount of compromise or convenience could ever give them what they had taken for granted when you were there. The cost of that choice becomes their quiet, unspoken karma. Number 13. They thought removing you would bring peace. Some people convince themselves that removing you from their life will restore calm, fix their chaos, or give them a sense of control. They think that without your presence, without your influence, the tension they felt will disappear. What they fail to realize is that peace isn't created by eliminating others. It's cultivated internally. Removing you didn't give them serenity. It exposed the unrest they had been masking all along. Without you there, they faced life in its raw, unfiltered form. The problems they had quietly ignored or displaced onto your presence didn't vanish. Bills, decisions, relationships, opportunities, none of it magically corrected itself. Instead, every imbalance, every neglected responsibility, and every unresolved conflict began to surface. They had believed peace could be purchased with absence, but life doesn't work that way. True peace is built through self-discipline, clarity, and accountability, not by pushing away the elements that make us uncomfortable. The irony is sharp. In trying to free themselves from you, they freed nothing but their own illusions. They had underestimated the stabilizing force you represented simply by existing with integrity and consistency. Your absence didn't create comfort, it created a vacuum, and vacuums always pull in chaos. They scrambled to regain control, not realizing that their anxiety, frustration, and stagnation were the natural consequences of relying on someone else's presence to regulate their world. Meanwhile, you moved forward without the noise. You didn't need to prove anything, manipulate situations, or claim attention. Your life expanded quietly, efficiently, and unapologetically, untouched by the attempts to remove you from the equation. The very calm they thought they were escaping from was something you carried internally, and it wasn't theirs to borrow. In the end, they discovered the hard truth. Peace cannot be taken by force, and removing someone who embodies it does not create harmony. It only leaves the space for reality to reveal what they were avoiding. They thought they would find quiet, but all they found was themselves, confronting the instability that had existed long before you ever left. Number 14. They now understand you were never the problem. Too late. By the time they finally see clearly, the realization hits like a quiet punch. You were never the obstacle. All the tension, all the blame, all the attempts to manipulate or control were never about you being difficult, weak, or unworthy. You were simply too honest, too steady, too consistent for them to dominate or bend. And that truth doesn't arrive in grand gestures or loud confrontations. It arrives slowly, painfully, and always after the moment to change anything has passed. They spent so much energy trying to make you fit into their expectations, to provoke a reaction, or to exploit patience they assumed was weakness. Every insult, every subtle attack, every behind-the-scenes scheme was aimed at control. They thought the chaos, the tension, and the friction came from you, but in reality, it came from them. from the limits of their own character, the impatience they carried, and the inability to face discomfort without projecting it onto someone else. While they were busy constructing this illusion, you continued to grow, evolve, and navigate life with clarity. You didn't need to prove anything because your integrity and consistency did it silently. Every decision, every boundary, every step forward became a testament to the fact that you weren't the problem. Your life wasn't disrupted by their schemes. Their life was disrupted by the contrast between who they were and who you naturally were. Now looking back, they feel the weight of what they missed. The relationships, opportunities, and respect they thought they controlled are gone or irreparably altered. Their attempts to undermine you only revealed the limits of their own character, and the longer they waited to realize it, the steeper the cost became. The irony is unmistakable. The person they tried to break, control, or manipulate never faltered in their essence. You moved on, unaffected by the judgment, gossip, or schemes, while they were left confronting the uncomfortable truth that the problem they fought against was never you. It was themselves. And by the time they see it, the lesson is set, the consequences are real, and the opportunity to make it right is long gone. In the end, the story isn't about revenge or proving a point. It's about clarity, growth, and the quiet, undeniable power of living life on your own terms. Every betrayal, every manipulation, every attempt to control or undermine you has its consequences. Not because the universe is judging, but because life responds naturally to the energy we put out. Those who tried to break you, steal from you, or hold you back discovered in time that their actions reflected more about them than about you. They mistook patience for weakness, presence for permission, and forgiveness for forgetfulness, and in doing so, they built a life constrained by their own limitations. Meanwhile, you moved forward, unshaken, unbothered, and unstoppable, quietly accumulating clarity, growth, and strength that cannot be borrowed, stolen, or replicated. This is the ultimate truth. People who underestimated you didn't lose you. They lost access to the very part of themselves that only thrived in your presence. Every small attempt to control, sabotage, or diminish only exposed their ceilings, highlighted their obsession, and revealed the hollowness of shortcuts over real growth. Life didn't punish them with spectacle, it simply mirrored their choices, and the cost of underestimating a chosen one is nothing subtle. It's the realization that you were never the problem, and by the time that clarity arrives, it's too late. For those of us watching, the lesson is sharp and simple. Stay consistent, protect your energy, and let life handle the rest. Karma isn't loud. It doesn't need your intervention. It simply balances the scales over time while you focus on the growth that matters. If this resonates with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep insights, like this video to show your support. Comment your thoughts so we can keep the conversation going, and share it with someone who needs this perspective. Life is too short to be distracted by people who don't understand your worth. And it's time we all recognize the quiet power of moving forward, unshaken and unstoppable. Stay awakened, chosen ones.